Hello YouTube! I'm going to be reviewing Adventures of the Mask Issue 6. As you could have obviously told from the cover, this one is going to have a RoboCop parody in it. The issue I Wear the Body electronic starts with an actual fake out. It looks like a giant is squeezing the mask and crushing him to death, but it's actually Lieutenant Killaway squeezing a mask action figure, talking about how the mask is Edge City's biggest menace, and now they're making toys of him, as an actual toy company has started making mask action figures. And then the guy who is running the booth walks up and says, "Pardon me, boys." And it just ends there, because you really don't need to know what he was going to ask them to do, when they're then seen walking around the Edge City Toy Expo. Kind of obvious that since we see him shooing them away, he wants them gone. He wants them to leave. And all over the Edge City Toy Expo, we get a lot of great references to all sorts of franchises that exist. Whether it is or is not part of Lieutenant Killaway going off like an asshole. For instance, right next to the mask booth, you've got a series of action figures for a kaiju called Gorzilla, who's obviously a reference to Godzilla. After leaving the mask action figure booth, Lieutenant Killaway says, what happened to the good, wholesome toys I played with as a kid, like Mr. Tomato Head? And Doyle says, "See, he's still around. Yeah, and he's now in the military and has a tagline that says, 'Splatter your enemies.'" Then Lieutenant Killaway asks about Commander Bo, and Doyle says these days he's got eye-gouging grip. And in the background you see a stand for Bat Guy action figures from Killer Toys, which is an obvious Batman reference. And then they find some Viewmasters, to which Lieutenant Killaway says, "Ah, Viewmasters, at least they haven't corrupted these." And Doyle says, "Hey, this reel is from Friday the 13th, Part 14. That bloody hatchet is in 3D. Lieutenant Killaway ended up going on a toy-themed rant because a company was making mask action figures. Now, if this was set in the main Dark Horse universe, or the Omnibus universe, or the Mask Omnibus, as some people have tended to call it nowadays, Lieutenant Killaway might actually have a point in what he's saying, as in that universe the mask is referred to as the Big Head Killer, and essentially, during the events of The Mask, The Hunt for Green October, some company started making big head Halloween costumes, and the mayor of the city actually called the company out on it in an actual press release. I gotta say, this is a very unique and interesting opening for a comic book. I mean, in the 90s and or early 2000s, this is the kind of opening I would see coming from any show that was essentially trying to tackle the idea of a toy or game company that wants to be hip with the kids, and in doing so, out of a complete act of desperation, they either gave a game or a toy line to a series of movies that was rated R, assuming that they'd only have to do something like this once, and it wouldn't really fall into some kind of slippery slope effect. Hell, the storyline itself would probably try to convince you, the viewer and or reader, to think whether or not that this sort of thing would have a slippery slope effect, or as to whether or not the parents are just a bunch of overprotective dolts who think their kids are complete idiots. It's also the kind of opening that could be to, hypothetically an episode or storyline about a video game company, which by nature are scummy, actually using over-the-top and brutal violence, blood, and gore to sell their products to kids. Hell, even with the line, "Is no toy sacred," this opening could literally be for a story about censorship in general, saying, well, we don't want our kids to see this because it could be inappropriate or it could scare them, and basically try to answer the question, do these people have a point, or are they just morons who think that their kids are going to have the brains of 2-year-olds for the rest of their lives? So Lieutenant Kellaway says, "Is no toy sacred?" when suddenly a familiar voice asks them if they're looking for an old classic. And on the next page we see the Mask dressed up as Geppetto while carving Pinocchio, and then he gives them a wedgie, while saying that's what the time-honored tradition is. While Lieutenant Killaway and Doyle have their underwear over their heads and crash into each other, the Mask escapes on a pogo stick. Lieutenant Killaway busts through his underpants, and as the Mask smashes through the roof, Killaway is screaming that this is the last time the Mask makes a fool out of him. Cut to Stanley Ipkiss, who admits he has no control what he does when he puts on the mask, but is just glad that no one got hurt this time. That, and he did enjoy giving Kellaway a wedgie. Cut to Edge City Police Department, where all these cops essentially start making fun of Lieutenant Killaway and Doyle. One of them called them the poster children for underwear, which causes Killaway to snap and say that the next time he sees the Mask, he's going to paint the town with his green face. Killaway busts through the precincts, screaming at everyone not to mention the Mask to him. So anyways, at a police briefing, the commissioner unveils Electrocop. Essentially this cybernetic robotic suit of armor that can make a man into a juggernaut, as he put it. Cut back to Stanley Ipkiss, who is watching the Screwball Skunk Marathon, when suddenly he hears somebody being robbed. Turns out it's an organ grinder who's being mugged, but then Stanley puts on the mask and springs into action. The Mask walks up to the organ grinder being mugged, and then pulls out a hammer and clocks the mugger right on the head, knocking him out. The Mask then changes into a superhero outfit, very reminiscent of both Superman and Shazam, and then flies the mugger to prison. Meanwhile, at police headquarters, Lieutenant Killaway is kind of, losing it over, the Mask. And he's at the point where he's already planning a stakeout when who should show up to bring in a beaten mugger but the Mask himself, who then speeds off to the Coco Bongo, and Lieutenant Killaway, who instantly jumps to the conclusion that the Mask was in cahoots with that mugger, basically gets the idea of taking his revenge on the Mask, to which he intends to use the Electrocop suit to do it. Meanwhile, at the Coco Bongo, the Mask is dancing with some woman when suddenly Killaway shows up in the Electrocop suit. Lieutenant Killaway then grabs the Mask by the neck and, using the Mask's tie like a sling, sends him flying out of the building, saying to prevent any civilians from from interfering with their fight or getting hurt in the crossfire, he's taking the fight outside. They fight, and the Mask does make some good jokes, but Killaway is out for blood. We get another page of this fight going on with gags. And then the mask transforms into the T-800 from Terminator, which could easily, since Electrocop is a parody of RoboCop, this choice could easily be an allusion to RoboCop vs. Terminator. They fight some more. Seems like the mask won the fight until Killaway shoves a cannon into the mask's mouth and tries to blow him up. Like I said, he's out for blood in this instance, and it jammed something in the mask switches places with a crash dummy and transforms into the Golden Age version of the Flash and runs off. Intercepts the missile that was just fired at him, eats it, and it blows up his stomach. Good thing he runs on cartoon logic. Clearly fed up with all of this, the mask comes at Lieutenant Kellaway with a giant can opener to pry him open, when suddenly he looks around at everything he's destroyed, realizing that he's the menace. And the issue ends with the mask essentially giving Killaway another wedgie and running away. And that was Adventures of the Mask issue 6. I mean, I really gotta say that this is a good comic. It's got a lot of references and allusions to other franchises in it. I mean, it really delves deep into the question of what if Lieutenant Kellaway could fight the Mask on equal grounds, and not only that, it kind of, also while being a RoboCop parody, it delves into the fact that police hate vigilantes because vigilantes take the law into their own hands. And a vigilante is essentially what a hero is. Superheroes are just vigilantes who hide their own identity. Basically as cover from assholes like Lieutenant Kellaway. And in all fairness, this comic shows you that if a cop and a vigilante go at it in a way where, say if both of them have superpowers, the cop will most likely be the bigger threat. I mean, yeah, I know that this is aimed at kids, because it's based off The Mask, the animated series, but if this was set in the main reality, Lieutenant Killaway would have murdered half of Edge City by accident. And in all fairness, I like it. If you can find it online, or the Adventures of the Mask Omnibus graphic novel, I suggest that you pick it up. And I'm going to end this review by saying that that piece of advice I just gave you is some really good advice.